So picture the most rigid, uncompromising public square you can possibly imagine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, you are standing in a country where the legal code is, it's woven directly into religious doctrine, and it's so heavily enforced that the simple act of, like, a man and a woman holding hands on the sidewalk.
Right. Just holding hands.
Exactly. Just holding hands could trigger an immediate interrogation or, worse, an arrest. The streets are actively patrolled by morality police.
Yeah, constantly.
And the television channels are broadcasting this continuous, unrelenting stream of state-approved religious sermons. So to the outside world, this state projects a monolith of just absolute, unyielding, pious conformity.
It's a very curated image, for sure.
Very curated. So hold that sterile, highly controlled image in your mind. Now, I want you to walk off that public street, step inside a residential apartment building, and open a closed door.
Because the contrast is just staggering.
It really is, because behind that door, the youth of this exact same country are throwing a massive, pulsing, just deafening house party.
Complete with homemade mango wine, right?
Yes. Homemade mango wine fermenting in a bathtub. They are blasting underground rap music that aggressively mocks the supreme leadership, and they're essentially navigating their daily lives using this incredibly sophisticated, invisible shadow society.
It's one of the most profound paradoxes of the modern world. We have this fundamental tendency to look at authoritarian states from the outside and just assume they operate as perfect, unbroken machines of control.
Right, because we just see the headlines.
Exactly. We see the headlines, we see the murals on the walls, the organized rallies, and we assume total compliance. But the reality on the ground, the actual day-to-day existence of millions of people, is a constant high-stakes negotiation.
A push and pull.
Yeah, a relentless push and pull between the crushing demands of the state apparatus and the just, unstoppable fundamental human desire for agency, connection, and honestly, just a little bit of joy.
Just living a normal life. And that hidden reality is exactly where we are going today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, we are stepping completely past the geopolitical sound bites and the cable news chyrons today to look at the living, breathing reality of modern Iran. Our guide for this is an incredible piece of research by Nikita Smogin.
It's a fantastic breakdown.
It really is. It's encapsulated in his book, To Everyone Iran, which we are exploring through a really comprehensive breakdown published by Medusa. And our mission for this deep dive is to strip away the grand illusions, both the ones the Iranian government projects to the world and, the ones the West projects onto Iran. We are going to shatter 7 fundamental myths about life in Iran.
And we really need to emphasize the mechanics here. We aren't just going to talk about the vague fact that Iranian youth rebel. We're going to look at the exact logistical blueprints of how they survive.
Yeah, the actual tactics. We are going to provide a concrete list of the ingenious and honestly sometimes really risky tactics they use to bypass these restrictions.
But to understand the sheer ingenuity of, say, an underground house party or a clandestine smuggling route, we first have to look at the architecture of the state they are rebelling against.
Right. You have to know what the cage looks like to understand how they pick the lock.
Exactly. The Iranian regime's domestic policies are deeply intertwined with its geopolitical survival. The way the state lies to the world about its friends and enemies perfectly mirrors the way it manages its own citizens.
Well, let's start right there with the grand geopolitical illusions, because this source material is just an ocean of contradictions, and it's fascinating. Let's tackle myth number 2.
The Russia myth.
Right. If you ask a casual observer to describe Iran's alliances, you'll almost certainly hear that Tehran and Moscow are locked in this unbreakable historical brotherhood.
Right, the whole anti-Western axis standing shoulder to shoulder against American hegemony.
Exactly. But when you actually open up the history books, the reality which shatters this myth is that that supposed friendship is built on a foundation of deep, unresolved trauma.
It's a relationship defined far more by historical anxiety than by any kind of shared brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
To understand how Iranians view Russia today, you have to realize that the cultural memory of Iran is exceptionally long.
Very long.
They do not view their northern neighbor as a modern anti-imperialist partner. They view Russia as a historical predator. The expansionist policies of Tsarist Russia and later the Soviet Union left deep, physical scars on Iranian territory.
Yeah, we are talking about centuries of territorial theft. Let's trace the mechanics of this because it doesn't start in the Cold War. It starts way back in the 1660s.
With Stepan Razin.
Right. You have Stepan Razin, the infamous Cossack leader, launching naval raids across the Caspian Sea, just devastating the northern Persian coast. And he wasn't just exploring.
No, not at all.
He was burning villages, slaughtering locals, taking captives. That is the first real introduction of Russian power to the Safed dynasty.
And that Cossack violence was really just a precursor to organized imperial ambition. The psychological breaking point really occurs in the 1720s under Peter the Great.
What exactly happened there?
Well, Peter looked south and saw the Safavid Empire crumbling from internal rebellions, and he recognized a geopolitical vacuum. He wanted control of the Caspian Sea to monopolize the incredibly lucrative silk trade routes connecting Europe to Asia.
So it was purely economic opportunism.
Purely. So he launched a massive military campaign exploiting Iran's weakness and effectively annexed vital, rich territories. We're talking Derbent, Baku, and the lush southern Caspian provinces of Gilan and Mazandaran.
Wait, really? He just marched in and took the entire northern coastline of the country?
He did.
How does a nation even recover from that kind of amputation?
I mean, they barely did. And the insult was actually compounded by what happened next. Less than a decade later, the Russian Empire, under Empress Anna Ioannovna, decided that maintaining those Persian territories was too costly.
You're kidding.
Nope. She was more worried about a looming war with the Ottoman Empire, so to secure Persia as a buffer, she simply handed the territories back. Yeah. Think about the psychological impact of that on the Iranian state. It demonstrates that Russia views Iranian land not as sovereign territory, but as loose change in their geopolitical pocket, to be taken and discarded purely based on Moscow's strategic convenience.
It's like a workplace proximity association, right? Where two colleagues act friendly in the break room, but one secretly remembers that the other stole their lunch every day for 300 years.
That is a very accurate analogy.
That kind of humiliation breeds a very specific kind of paranoia. And Russia just kept coming back. I mean, you have the bloody Russo-Persian wars of the 19th century, where Iran permanently loses the Caucasus areas that are now Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan.
Right.
And then jumping to the 20th century, we see the exact same predatory behavior from the Soviet Union. In 1945, the Soviets don't just occupy northern Iran. They actively try to dismantle the country from the inside.
Yes, the establishment of the Democratic Republic of Azerbaijan inside Iran. This is a crucial, often overlooked piece of history.
Yeah, walk us through that.
So during World War II, Britain and the Soviet Union jointly invaded Iran to secure oil fields and supply lines. But when the war ended, the Soviets refused to leave. Instead, Stalin directly funded and armed a separatist communist state in northern Iran.
Just carved right out of their territory.
Exactly. The Soviet military literally blocked Iranian government forces from entering their own provinces to put down the rebellion.
So the Soviet Union essentially created a proxy state inside Iran's borders.
They did. It only lasted for about a year before international pressure, heavily driven by the United States at the newly formed United Nations, forced the Soviets to withdraw, causing the proxy state to collapse. But the message to Tehran was crystal clear. Moscow will shatter your national sovereignty the second it serves their interests.
Which brings us to this incredible, kind of bizarre piece of historical folklore that perfectly captures this paranoia. It's a document known as Peter's Testament.
Oh, Peter's Testament is a fascinating psychological artifact. It is a complete forgery, fabricated in France in the early 19th century, allegedly detailing Peter the Great's secret, step-by-step master plan for Russia to conquer the Middle East and achieve world domination.
It's basically a 19th century conspiracy theory.
Absolutely.
But why did it gain so much traction in Iran? If it was a known French forgery, why did Iranian intellectuals and politicians latch onto it so hard?
Because it perfectly explained their lived reality. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Iran was trapped in the Great Game, that geopolitical chess match between the British Empire in India and the expanding Russian Empire.
Right.
Iran was being carved up into spheres of influence. For an Iranian citizen watching Russian troops continually cross their borders and dictate their trade, Peter's Testament didn't feel like a conspiracy. It felt like a leaked playbook.
That makes total sense.
Even today, you will find echoes of this document in Iranian public discourse when people try to explain why Vladimir Putin makes certain moves in Syria or the Caspian.
So when we see Iranian drones being sent to Russia today, or we see handshakes between leaders in Tehran and Moscow, We shouldn't view that as a deep ideological alliance. It's an alliance of pure, desperate convenience.
Precisely. It is transactional. Iran is heavily sanctioned and cut off from Western markets. Russia is now heavily sanctioned and cut off from Western markets. They are trading with each other because they have no one else to trade with, not because they have forgotten the last 300 years of Russian imperialism.
That transactional pragmatism completely shatters the myth of Russian friendship, but it also leads us directly into myth number 3, which is perhaps even more pervasive.
The illusion of the American enemy.
Right. The myth that ever since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran and the United States have been completely uncompromising, permanent, sworn enemies. I mean, the state slogan is literally death to America. They paint it on buildings, they chant it in parliament. The assumption is that Tehran's hatred for Washington is the unmovable bedrock of their foreign policy.
And it was the bedrock for Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic. His anti-Americanism was absolute. But the reality is that after his death in 1989, the internal dynamics of the Iranian leadership shifted significantly.
They had to face reality.
Exactly. The state realized that ideological purity does not put food on the table. And it certainly doesn't stabilize an economy hollowed out by an 8-year war with Iraq. So beneath the loud public chanting, there has been a continuous pragmatic search for reconciliation with the West.
Which is how we arrive at the defining diplomatic moment of the 2010s. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the 2015 Iran nuclear deal negotiated under the Obama administration.
And the mechanics of the JCPOA are incredibly revealing about how Iran actually negotiates. Iran didn't agree to this deal because they suddenly liked the United States.
Obviously not.
They agreed because international sanctions had essentially frozen their economy. They couldn't sell oil on the open market, and they couldn't access the global banking system. In exchange for lifting those crippling sanctions, Iran agreed to physically dismantle thousands of nuclear centrifuges, ship away their stockpiles of enriched uranium, and allow intrusive, continuous inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency.
It was an economic lifeline, and the U.S. strategy here was deeply structural. It wasn't just about delaying a bomb. The underlying theory was that if you integrate Iran into the global economy, you empower the Iranian middle class,
If I bring them into the fold.
Exactly. If citizens start seeing foreign investment, better jobs, economic hope, they will naturally demand more political freedom from their leaders. It was a bet that economic integration would slowly erode the hardline authoritarianism from the inside.
And we actually saw glimpses of this pragmatic integration spilling over into military reality. This brings us to one of the most staggering facts of modern Middle Eastern history.
Yes, I love this part.
During the chaotic rise of the Islamic State, or ISIS, in Iraq and Syria, the United States military and the Iranian military essentially operated as a synchronized allied force.
I really want to drill down into the mechanics of this because, honestly, it sounds impossible. If the U.S. and Iran were literally teaming up against ISIS, why does the death to America narrative persist so strongly? And how do you have the U.S. Air Force and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, two entities that officially view each other as terrorist organizations fighting the exact same enemy on the exact same battlefield without killing each other?
It required an incredibly delicate, unspoken choreography. See, international grandstanding often serves domestic political purposes rather than reflecting actual pragmatic back-channel diplomacy. ISIS was an existential threat to both American interests and to the Iranian state, as ISIS violently targeted Shia Muslims.
Right, the survival of the state was at stake.
Exactly. The survival of the state forces temporary alliances of convenience. So a pragmatic division of labor emerged in Iraq. The United States and its coalition partners controlled the airspace, providing devastating aerial bombardment and intelligence. On the ground, the vanguard fighting forces pushing into ISIS strongholds like Tikrit were largely comprised of Iraqi Shia militias.
And those militias were directly funded, armed, and often commanded by Iranian Quds Force generals.
Exactly. The U.S. was essentially providing close air support for Iranian proxy forces. They didn't share a direct radio frequency, but they used the Iraqi central government as a conduit to deconflict the battle space.
It's like talking through a mediator.
Exactly. The U.S. would tell the Iraqis where they were going to bomb, the Iraqis would tell the Iranian-backed militias where not to stand, and together they squeezed ISIS out of existence.
Let's just pause and appreciate the immense cognitive dissonance happening here. On a Friday, you have hardline clerics in Tehran leading thousands of people in screaming "Death to America," burning the flag in the public square. And on a Tuesday, an Iranian general in the desert is relying on an American F-18 fighter jet to clear a path for his troops.
It's wild.
How does the regime justify this to its own supporters?
By maintaining a strict firewall between the domestic political theater and the actual requirements of national security. As I said, international grandstanding serves domestic purposes. The regime uses the death to America narrative as a binding agent. It creates a perpetual state of emergency, an ever-present foreign bogeyman that justifies their total grip on domestic power.
Ah, I see.
If the U.S. is always about to destroy the revolution, then the citizens can't complain about the lack of human rights or the failing economy. But when a real physical threat like ISIS appears, or when the economy is truly on the brink of collapse, the supreme leadership quietly puts the ideology in a drawer and does whatever it takes to survive.
And it really shows you, as a listener, how easily public perception is shaped by headlines. You see the chanting on the news, but the real historical context, like centuries of Russian expansionism or the absolute need for economic development, is what actually drives a nation's deep-seated anxieties and back-channel deals.
Exactly. It's an incredibly calculated performance. But that delicate, pragmatic mechanism only works if both sides play along. And as the research highlights, the American political system is prone to massive, abrupt policy reversals.
Right. In 2018, the subsequent U.S. administration unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA, canceling the deal and initiating a maximum pressure campaign of devastating new sanctions.
And for the Iranian leadership, this validated all of their deepest paranoias. It proved to the hardliners that the U.S. could never be trusted to honor an agreement, fundamentally closing the door on that era of pragmatic integration.
So these macro-level paradoxes of statecraft perfectly mirror the paradoxes of the state's internal structure, which leads us to myth number 1.
The illusion of the clean slate.
Yes, the current regime projects an image of a total Islamic reset. The myth that the 1979 Islamic Revolution completely destroyed the old way of life and built purely religious institutions from scratch.
But the reality is much more complicated. The Islamists didn't destroy, they adapted. We often hear there was a year zero event. The myth is that Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers swept into power, burned the secular government of the Shah to the ground, and built a pure, unadulterated Islamic utopia completely from scratch.
That's the story every revolution wants to tell about itself.
Right.
Total purification. But the reality of statecraft is that if you fire the sanitation workers, the bankers, and the judges, your country collapses in a week. You can't run a nation of millions purely on religious zeal.
Exactly. Total destruction of institutions usually leads to state collapse. The Iranian regime survived because it was pragmatic enough to co-opt existing functioning bureaucracies. Smygin's research dismantles this clean slate illusion by showing how the Islamists actually co-opted and cannibalized the existing institutions. They didn't destroy the Shah's bureaucracy. They hijacked it and dressed it in religious clothing.
So let's look at the legal system. You would assume an Islamic Republic operates entirely on Sharia law, administered by clerics sitting in mosques.
Right, relying on centuries-old religious texts to decide civil disputes. But the reality is far more bureaucratic. Prior to the revolution, the Shah had modernized the Iranian legal system by explicitly modeling it on French civil law.
Oh, French civil law.
Yeah, they imported the French structural framework for courts, contracts, and civil procedures. When the revolutionaries took over, they didn't throw this massive functioning French framework away. They kept the civil bureaucracy, the court structure, and the administrative processes, and they simply slapped mandatory Islamic norms on top of them.
Wait, so how does that actually work in practice?
It creates a deeply hybridized system. If you are dealing with a complex corporate contract dispute in Tehran, the underlying mechanisms of how that case is filed, argued, and processed look remarkably similar to a European civil court.
Interesting.
But if you are dealing with family law, inheritance, or criminal offenses like alcohol consumption or dress code violations, the Islamic Penal Code aggressively supersedes the civil framework. It's a secular chassis with a theocratic engine.
And we see an even more extreme version of this hybridization when we look at the military. The revolutionaries despised the Shah's traditional military, the Artesh. They viewed it as a secular, Western-trained force that could potentially launch a counter-coup. So why didn't they just disband it?
Because in 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. The country was thrust into a brutal existential war with Iraq, and you cannot fight a mechanized modern war without professional soldiers, fighter pilots, and artillery officers. The regime needed the Shah's army to physically defend the borders.
So they kept it.
They kept the traditional army intact. But to ensure they couldn't rebel against the clerics, the regime built a massive parallel military force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC.
And the IRGC isn't just a special forces unit, it is an entirely separate military ecosystem.
Yes, with its own army, navy, and air force. The traditional army's constitutional mandate is to defend the physical borders of Iran. The IRGC's mandate is to defend the ideology of the Islamic Revolution. By building two parallel militaries, the regime effectively coup-proofed itself.
But the IRGC isn't just holding guns. This brings us to the most staggering example of how the new regime cannibalized the old one. We have to talk about the money, the Pahlavi Foundation.
Yes. Under the Shah, the Pahlavi Foundation was a gargantuan tax-exempt wealth fund that effectively operated as the personal piggy bank for the royal family. It had monopolistic holdings in real estate, banking, construction, agro-industry, and hotels. It was the central engine of the Iranian economy.
Now, if you are leading a populist religious revolution dedicated to the poor and oppressed, the obvious move would be to liquidate this royal trust fund and distribute the wealth to the citizens, right? Or at least break up the monopolies.
You would think so. But that is not what happened at all. The revolutionary leadership simply seized the foundation, renamed it the Foundation of the Oppressed, and handed control of this multi-billion-dollar empire directly to the IRGC.
That is just mind-boggling. It's the equivalent of a corporate hostile takeover where the new CEO fires the old boss, keeps the exact same office furniture and accounting software, but just changes the company dress code and renames the trust fund.
That is precisely what happened. The IRGC went from being a ragtag militia of ideological enforcers to the largest corporate conglomerate in the Middle East. This economic reality is crucial to understanding why the regime is so difficult to dislodge.
Right.
The men holding the guns aren't just defending a religious ideology, they are defending their own incredibly lucrative corporate monopolies.
So the state built its power by layering strict Islamic rules over pre-existing structures. But how does that top-down religious pressure actually manifest in the daily private lives of citizens? Let's look at the youth, who have essentially built a parallel society.
This is where the story shifts from the resilience of the state to the phenomenal resilience of the youth.
Which brings us to myth number 4, the secret social life and the act of rebellion. The regime projects an image of absolute moral purity, the myth of universally strict morals, no premarital sex, and zero prostitution.
But the reality is that in big cities, the youth completely ignore these bans. Without bars or clubs, social life moves underground to house parties and mutual friend networks.
Because when you exert that much pressure on a population, especially a young population facing high unemployment, you don't eliminate their desires, you just force those desires underground.
This is the critical context. Iran produces brilliant engineers, doctors, and artists, but the sanctioned, isolated economy cannot provide them with jobs. You have an educated youth with massive amounts of free time and parental support, focusing heavily on dating.
And the source notes that for many, premarital sex isn't just about hormones. It's a direct, defiant act of political protest.
Absolutely.
It's their way of saying, go to hell to the regime's strictures. For a generation completely stripped of traditional economic milestones like careers or buying a house, they find agency and rebellion in the one thing they can control: their bodies and relationships.
It is the ultimate reclamation of agency.
Yeah.
It is a deeply psychological rejection of the system. But the regime's obsession with regulating morality ends up creating vast networks of hypocrisy. Let's look at the C loophole.
Oh, this is wild. Let's talk about the city of Qom. Qom is the theological heartbeat of Iran, is where the supreme leaders study and teach. Prostitution in Iran is illegal and carries terrifying punishments up to the death penalty. Yet in the holy city of Qom, there is a thriving, open secret of a sex economy.
Yes, and it operates entirely within the boundaries of the law, utilizing a religious mechanism called Sai. Sai is a provision within Shia Islamic jurisprudence that allows for a temporary marriage.
Wait, so to prevent illegal sex, the system essentially created a religious subscription service that operates like a legal loophole for sex work.
That is exactly what it is. The duration of the marriage contract is entirely up to the two parties involved. It can last for a year, a month, a week, or incredibly, a single hour.
I really need you to walk me through the mechanics of this, because the cognitive dissonance is staggering. A man and a sex worker in Qom agree to an arrangement. How does this religious doctrine actually shield them from the morality police?
It's essentially a bureaucratic process of theological laundering. Technically, it requires a simple Arabic phrase to initiate the marriage, but in modern Iran, you need paperwork. So the couple will visit the office of a local cleric. They state their intention for a temporary marriage, say for an hour or a day. The cleric registers the agreement and provides them with an official stamped certificate.
And that piece of paper is a literal get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. If this couple walks into a hotel in Qom and presents the size certificate, the clerk is legally obligated to accept that they are husband and wife and will issue them a room. If the police knock on the door, presenting that document immediately shuts down any accusation of illicit sex or prostitution.
It is astounding. The state demands compliance on paper, and the citizens have learned exactly how to manufacture that paper. But a thriving underground social scene requires supplies. If you're hosting a defiant house party, what are you serving? This leads us to the underground economy of vice.
Myths 5 and 6. The illusion of a total dry law and the total eradication of drugs.
Let's start with myth 5, alcohol. The official line is absolute. Alcohol is completely non-existent, right? It's strictly forbidden by Islam.
Supposedly non-existent. Yet, up to 15% of youth drink regularly. We are talking about millions of people drinking in a country where possession can lead to lashes.
So the obvious question is logistics. If there are no liquor stores, how are millions of people getting their hands on alcohol?
The distribution relies on a highly sophisticated network centered around a figure known as the Sagi, the modern-day wine bearer or dealer. You message them on a secure app, place your order, and they deliver it directly to your door.
It's an underground concierge service.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have the money, an elite Sagi can procure foreign alcohol. This is smuggled through mountain trails by Kurds from Iraqi Kurdistan. They're known as coal bars, strapping massive loads to their backs.
Hiking over the Zagros Mountains trying to evade guards who have orders to shoot on sight. It's incredibly dangerous.
Very dangerous. Because of the risk and the bribes, a genuine bottle of foreign whiskey will sell in Tehran for roughly triple its original market price.
Which means it's a luxury status symbol. The vast majority of those young people drinking cannot afford a heavily marked up bottle of smuggled vodka, so they turn to domestic production.
The massive domestic moonshine industry.
Right. They bypass the alcohol ban entirely by turning domestic spaces into unregulated breweries, fermenting everything from grapes to mulberries, pears, and remarkably, even mangoes into homemade wine and arak, a traditional raisin spirit.
And with zero quality control. The physical risks are terrifying. Improper distillation produces methanol, and every year, hospitals are flooded with mass poisonings.
It's Russian roulette. It really highlights the tension between public policy and deep-seated cultural habits. It shows the limits of authoritarianism. You can legislate morality, but you cannot legislate away human desire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And alcohol is only half of the vice economy. Myth 6 is that strict laws have eradicated drugs. They have the death penalty for possession, yet it clashes with a massive user base of 1.5 to 2 million opium users.
Opium or teriac is so ingrained it's used as a traditional painkiller, even for kids, right?
Yes. For centuries, it was woven into the fabric of daily life. And despite the modern brutal crackdown, the number of users has remained remarkably static. It is an immovable cultural object.
Which brings us to the Bolshevik anecdote. This is genuinely one of the most incredible historical footnotes. Let's go back to the 1920s.
The Gilan Soviet Republic.
Yes. The Bolsheviks arrive in northern Iran to spread communism, ready to forge a disciplined revolutionary army. And what happens?
They encounter the local armed groups, who were indeed rebellious, but who were also deeply addicted to smoking teriac. And the locals introduced it to their new Soviet comrades. The widespread use of teriac played a massive role in destroying the operational capacity of the arriving Soviet cadres.
So the spread of the Red Army was literally stopped because they just got too high and forgot to do the revolution.
That is essentially the historical record. The revolutionary discipline dissolved in a cloud of opium smoke, effectively halting the spread of Soviet power.
It is the ultimate historical irony. But today's golden youth have moved on, right?
Yes, the demand in urban centers has shifted toward party drugs. Amphetamines and ecstasy are widely distributed through those same Sagi networks. And marijuana is so common, there's actually debate in the parliament about legalizing it for medical use.
Which is a staggering admission of reality from a regime that officially executes drug smugglers. So we have the parties, the dating, the underground drinks, and drugs. But every youth movement needs a soundtrack.
Myth number 7.
Yes, the myth that pop and Western music are totally suppressed and there are no rockers or rappers in Iran.
The reality is that underground in Iran just means popular music, because it's completely banned to sell records or perform live, especially for women. Artists rely entirely on the internet.
And the defining sound of the youth is the rap scene.
Absolutely. Rap ranges from hyper-political critiques of the regime to songs about poverty to tracks just bragging about a carefree lifestyle.
But if they can't sell records, how do they distribute it?
Foreign-based radio and streaming platforms like Radio Javan. They operate servers outside of Iran, but broadcast back into the country.
So if an artist is pulling millions of streams online but can't legally play a concert in their own hometown without getting raided, isn't the internet essentially acting as an untouchable parallel state for the youth?
It absolutely is. Digital infrastructure has fundamentally broken the regime's monopoly on culture. The government controls the physical space, the streets, the concert halls, but the youth completely control the digital and psychological space.
But the artist's physical body is still in Iran.
Right, which creates the artist's dilemma. If you avoid politics, you might avoid arrest, but you still can't get a license. The most popular artists eventually flee to Istanbul, Europe, or the US to play real concerts, leaving the threat of police raids behind.
Looking at all of this, the dating, the drinking, the music, it's clear the Iranian youth aren't just surviving. They've developed a highly specific tactical playbook for navigating their reality. Let's lay out exactly what that playbook looks like.
A concrete list of tactics used by Iranian citizens to bypass state bans. This is the ultimate takeaway.
Let's do it. Think of this as a survival guide written by an entire generation. It's almost like a nationwide open-source project in hacking an authoritarian operating system.
Okay, tactic 1, the Psi loophole. Utilizing the religious provision of temporary marriage to bypass strict anti-prostitution and hotel sharing laws. They are turning a religious doctrine into a bureaucratic shield.
Brilliant. Tactic 2, the Sagi network. Relying on a whisper network of local dealers who act as underground sommeliers, procuring everything from homemade liquor to party drugs.
Tactic 3, cross-border smuggling rings. Tapping into the Kurdish smuggling routes from Iraq to import high-end foreign alcohol for those who can afford the triple price markup.
Tactic 4, kitchen distilleries. Bypassing the alcohol ban entirely by turning domestic spaces into unregulated breweries, fermenting everything from mulberries to mangoes into homemade wine and arak.
Tactic 5, offshore digital broadcasting, using foreign-based platforms like Radio Javan and the broader internet to distribute, consume, and monetize banned music. This effectively moves the entire music industry out of the physical jurisdiction of the morality police.
And finally, Tactic 6, the house party sanctuary, transforming the private home into the ultimate public square. Since bars and clubs don't exist, private residences become the hubs for dating, dancing, and political defiance.
Living a double life like this one for the streets, one for the home, requires immense cognitive effort. It takes a psychological toll, but it also creates a deeply bonded, highly resourceful generation.
Absolutely. So, to summarize the journey for you today, we stripped away the myths of foreign friendships and total moral control. We revealed a complex society where French laws mix with Islamic courts, and where youth fight back not just with protests, but with house parties, mango wine, and underground rap.
And it leaves us with a final, provocative thought. When a government forces its entire youth population to become expert smugglers, digital hackers, and legal loopholers just to live a normal life, does that state accidentally train the very generation that will eventually possess the exact skills needed to dismantle it?
That is something to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you read about a sanctioned nation, look beyond the headlines.